Genesis 4, but this is, right at the beginning, right? So you have Adam and Eve, and they have two sons, Cain and Abel. And which one's the oldest? Cain, right? So we can see that in verse 1, right, she conceived Cain, and, she seems excited about this, right, in the sense that I have acquired a man from the Lord. And verse 2, she bore again, and this time his brother Abel. Okay, so Cain's the older brother, Cain and Abel. And so what did they do? What was Abel's profession? Sheep herder, right? So he tended the sheep, we see, he was a keeper of the sheep, verse 2. And what did Cain do? Okay, tiller of the ground, a farmer, somebody who works the ground, right? And what's that? Has a vegetable garden, okay. And when we start looking, so that's the kind of the introduction of the two, right? So they're the sons of Adam and Eve. Cain's the eldest, and Abel's a keeper of the sheep, and Cain is a tiller of the ground. Then in verse 3, what happens, or what's going on in verse 3? Okay, so there's a sacrifice here, right, or an offering, right? So it says in the process of time, they came and they made an offering. So verse 3 talks about Cain's offering. And what do we know about Cain's offering? Okay, true, but before that, what do we know about Cain's offering? So it was of the ground, right? He brought what he was familiar with or what he had. Okay, so or what was readily available to him. He made an offering, verse 3, that was of the fruit of the ground. And this offering was to who? It was to God, right? It was to the Lord, yeah. We'll a little bit. Yeah, but you're right. We'll kind of play with that just a little bit here in a minute. So he makes an offering to the Lord, and was he the only one that made an offering? No. Abel made an offering too, right? In verse 4, did he bring the vegetables and okay, yeah, he brought the first fruits of his flock, right? So it says in verse 4, he also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. Okay? And so those are the offerings, right? Cain brings of the ground, Abel brings of the flock. And what we know in the rest of verse 4 is what? What does it tell us? That's right. That's right. And so the Lord respected Abel and his offering. Okay, so we know that. And what also do we know in verse 5? So he didn't respect Cain's offering. Now, why wouldn't he respect Cain's offering, and why would he respect Abel's offering? Okay, so there's a thought that one followed the instructions and one didn't follow instructions. Okay? The blood was the key. Blood offering, you think. Okay. Do we know? I mean, I don't know. Do we know for sure what? Okay. So we know in Hebrews that it says that that Abel he offered by faith. You would infer from that there was some level of instruction or some level of knowledge that was given so that somebody could respond in faith, right? Because it says in verse 5, he didn't respect what? God didn't respect what? Cain and his offering. It's kind of both. Now, they go together, but he didn't like the offering, what was offered, and he didn't like Cain's heart around it, right? His level of faith around it. So it was both the offering and Cain himself. Okay. Now, just as an aside, have you, oh, go ahead before I jump into that.
One thing that really stands out to me between Cain and Abel's offering, even aside from the blood aspect, is Cain's offering does not say it was the first fruits or the best fruits of the ground. He just brought fruit of the ground.
Okay.
So there's no indication there that he even, selected the best for God.
Okay. So the comment was, in verse 4, Abel brought of the firstborn of his flock, right? Which indicates that, it was the best, it was the most sought after. I mean, we know in history the firstborn, was something that there was extra relevance. Okay, this is early. Relevance attached to. Okay. It's the very best. All right. It's kind of the very best. We don't see that even with the ground offering. Okay, so that was the comment that was made there. Have we ever not given of our best when we come to worship God? And what might that look like? How might we not give our best when we come? Okay, so if your mind's not in it.
There's times where you're tired or you're distracted by things that are going on in your life.
Okay, just distracted, right? Or you're tired. I mean, we're human, right? You get tired, and sometimes we get here and we're exhausted. I mean, I know no one has ever fallen asleep during a sermon or a class or anything, right? Sometimes you find yourself kind of getting tired, or you're just not paying attention, or you're worried about other things. Yeah, so if we don't sing or we don't give as we've been prospered, when you think about the Lord's Supper, so there's times maybe when we don't bring our very best. And so we can look at Cain and say, well, we should have listened, and he knew better, and he could have brought something better, and he didn't. And it's true. What I want us to get to overall is that the account of Cain and Abel actually isn't that far away from any of us. Okay, we think about Cain and Abel, and we think about, oh, he killed his brother, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's not that far away, right? We come to worship God, and sometimes we could look across and maybe one of our brothers or sisters is bringing something better than we are. And better doesn't mean, we know it doesn't mean necessarily more expensive or more, right? We know the account of the widow and the 2 mites that she gave, but it's about your heart, right? It's about sacrifice. It's about faith.
We also have a situation where, as the church began to deviate, people thought it was better to have instrumental music, and so they didn't have respect for the commandments of God. They added to and changed, and they take the Lord's Supper every 3 months or whatever they choose to do. Totally disrespectful of God's commandments.
Yeah, so sometimes we think we know better and that it really doesn't matter, okay? That it's not that important, that we kind of know what God wants and we can change it up a little bit. So Cain changed it up, and it didn't work out for him. Now, what is Cain, so God wasn't happy. Does Cain or Abel know that God's not happy?
Cain talks directly with Cain and asks him, why are you basically upset? Why is your face fallen?
Okay, so what was Cain's response? So we know that God was pleased with Abel, not pleased with Cain, didn't respect Cain or his offering. And what was Cain's response? Anger. A little bit angry? I mean, he was very angry. I mean, he was angry. And his countenance fell. What does that mean, his countenance fell? Okay, I mean, he was angry. Okay, I mean, it was just obvious, and he was just kind of dejected.
It wasn't just, I'm angry now, I'm all right. He just kind of grew.
It affected his whole being, right? You can tell when someone is really bothered by something, right? You can see how they carry themselves. You can see, in their eye contact. You can see just how they walk or how they sit or how they whatever. It's different. His whole countenance lowered, okay?
You know God's no respect of persons, but here God had respect for Abel, but did not have respect for Cain. It wasn't because he preferred Abel over Cain. It's that Cain didn't do as he ought to have done.
Yeah, that's right. God is a respecter of hearts, right? I mean, so he is looking for hearts. Do you have a comment? No, okay, sorry. All right. So Cain knows, Cain is angry, and then to the point that was made, now, I guess before I jump to that, he's angry about this. Last week we said anger was kind of rooted in what? When we looked at Joseph. When people are aggressive, or they're angry, or they're resentful. Okay, fear, right? Jealousy, but there's a fear there. Okay, what might Cain have been fearful of? So think about it. You're going before God. Your brother goes before God. You go before God. And you know God does not respect your offering. Now, anger, he gets really angry. But anger is a response. Right? Anger is it's a emotion that's triggered, but what did Cain have to be fearful of? Okay, one could be that I'm not as good as my brother, and there's that same thing again. There's a clue a little bit in verse 7.
So there's sin, that he's, and there's something sinful in his life that's going to separate him from God, or has already.
Okay, so that he's done that he's done something wrong, sinful, or wrong, or displeasing to God that's going to separate him, or he isn't accepted, right? Same thing of being separated from God, is that he's not accepted by God. I mean, is it not a fearful thing to be separated from God? And you have a choice, right? We all have a choice when we learn that that we might be separated from God. Our choice is to build a wall and get kind of indignant and angry is a protection defense mechanism, or what's our other option? Yeah, humility, right, is our other option. You can still be fearful, but fear could also drive humbleness and humility. And it could cause you to reflect, and it could cause you, you see that with people. They have an option, right? They can either become callous and indignant and angry, like Pharaoh, or you see people who put on sackcloth and ashes, and they cover themselves, and, oh, what have I done? What have my people done? Right? And they tear their clothes, and they sit. We have a choice when presented with scenarios where we learn that maybe I'm doing something that isn't pleasing to God and that God doesn't accept me. And when we see things in the church, when we're in the church, are we not ever learning? I mean, we're all at a different path in our journey. We have people who have been here a week. We have people who have been here a month. We have people who have been here 6 years, 20 years. When I say here, I just mean in the kingdom, right? In the church. We're all at a different path, and we're all ever learning if we're studying as we should be and as we're reflecting on our lives. And do we not have epiphanies at times in our life? I mean, do we believe exactly the same way that did the day that we were baptized? I mean, do we not get knowledge over time, and we start to, in wisdom, and we understand things, and we might even look back on our lives and say, I would have handled that situation different had I known then what I know now. But it's just part of our maturity curve. And as we become aware, as we like to talk about a society that's, woke, okay? And as we become woke, right, to the Word, we have a choice every time to either build a defense and get indignant and say, I'm not going to do that, or God, I'm not going to go there, or we become humble. And that's why it's important to have, that kind of a heart. So, he could have admitted he was wrong. Yep, go ahead.
We also see in verse 7 the presence of Satan. So Peter says that the devil is the roaring lion waits to seek who he can devour. Here we have sin, who is desiring, it's at the door, it's desiring, and it says it wants to rule over you. And God warns Cain about it, but obviously Cain didn't heed the warning.
That's right. So, yes, yes, it is. And we're going to talk about that. So his fear might be he's not accepted by God, maybe that he's failed as an older brother. Now, I didn't have an older brother, and I wasn't an older brother. I have an older sister, so a little different dynamic. But I'm guessing if you're an older brother to to anybody, probably. I know how men are a little bit, right? You don't want to fail. There's a level of responsibility there. And to have your little brother kind of outdo you, there's probably some things that are going on there. But he could have admitted he was wrong. But in verses 6 and 7, there's a conversation between God and Cain, and this is pre-murder. Okay, so pre-murder here, he goes and he tells in verse 6, the Lord says to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? Okay, God calls it out. And as we talked about, anger was not the only response. There could have been another response, right? I mean, even God saying, why are you angry? Like, why get angry? Does God think we're perfect? I mean, this isn't going to be the only time God's ever disappointed in somebody. Right? Okay, so you brought me the wrong sacrifice. You didn't listen. Why are you angry? What does God tell him? He says, why are you angry? What's verse 7? What's he tell him, basically? If you do the right thing, I'll be happy with you. Like, why are you getting angry about it, right? I tell you what the secret is, and you've got a choice. And you can either do it. If you do well, you'll be accepted. And if you do not do well, what? Sin lies at the door, right? If you're going to decide not to do well, and it's desiring you, it's looking for you. You're just opening the door for this by having the response of anger versus a response of humility, right?
I think you said he decided to not do well. Just a chapter earlier, tilling the ground and working the fields was the punishment for Adam and Eve eating of the tree of life. So he's bringing his offering, which was the punishment from his parents for doing something they were given the food originally, and that was his offering. So I think very much it is him choosing not to give his best, not just an absent mind or not, paying attention. I think it was very much a choice to bring less than what he knew he should have.
What could have Cain done? So let's say that the blood was important, that it needed to be a blood offering. Let's say that the offering of the ground wasn't going to be enough. Perhaps what would that have required Cain to do?
Humble himself and ask his brother for help. Can I have another's person?
You may have to go to little brother who's watching over the sheep. Or change his attitude. I don't know 100% if it was the blood or if it was, just his heart or how he gave it, or it wasn't the first fruit of what he gave. I don't know exactly, okay? But let's assume for a moment, right, that it was, and we know how important that blood sacrifice is later. He could have gone to his brother and said, brother, we both want to please the Lord. And you're the keeper of the sheep, and I've got this. I'll even trade for you, or I'll work for you, or I'll give you some of this for you and your family if you give me a sheep that I can give to the Lord.
And then he had the example of the Lord was pleased. So he had two chances. He got the example, even if he didn't end up going in, he got the example. He could have done that afterwards instead of the
And he could have, right? He could have gone back after the conversation and made penance or gone to his brother and say, listen, I've clearly disappointed the Lord. I need a sheep, right? I want an offering like yours to please the Lord. And gave Abel some of his vegetables or whatever, right? They could have, but we have to think about why don't we do those kinds of things, right? We get stuck in, I can only work with what I have. I don't want to ask a brother, I don't want to be vulnerable, I don't, and what does it do? It divides us, right? Anytime Satan can start to separate and put a resentment and put a something in between us, it creates discord. Yep.
And a lot of times too, we go through life and we fool ourselves. And by fooling ourselves, we think we're fooling God, and we never fool God. And there's obviously, it appears to be a problem in Cain's heart before the sacrifice. That's why his sacrifice wasn't what it needed to be. And he could have been fooling himself, and this is where the rubber met the road, and God called him out on it. And he could have gotten angry because his inner being, his heart, the intent of his heart was being exposed.
Okay. Go ahead, Jody, and I'll come.
If you have a gardener, and I've done it, I've seen it, and I've heard it all my life, who raises really beautiful tomatoes, they have a lot of pride and joy in the quality of the fruit they produce in their garden. And I can see Cain say, well, my fruit, this is perfect fruit. Why would it not be accepted? And substituting it. And that would also kind of explain why he was so angry. Because God didn't just say, I'm disappointed in you, but don't bring that fruit. Even though it was, your best apple or your best tomato, God wanted what he wanted. And God had been given instructions for them to know to do it by faith.
Yeah. Yeah, Dwayne?
I was just going to say that it kind of proves that, thousands and thousands of years, and we really haven't changed that much. And here, you're in a world where, at least as far as we know at this particular point, there may have only been 4 people on the whole world. And yet one of them, and God was actually there, the manifestation of God, and yet Cain still tried to have his own attitude and fool God.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he won't know the difference.
Yeah, I mean, the point was is that, things just haven't changed that much, even over thousands of years. Go ahead.
I was just thinking that God would not, he would just not arbitrarily look down and say, I'm not going to accept your sacrifice without giving instructions on what the sacrifice should be. We don't always know every law that was given for the Gentiles or for whoever, but we know that when he says he didn't have respect for something, then they didn't follow the instructions that were given. So it could be his heart, the sacrifice, his heart, whatever it was, he didn't follow it.
Yeah. He told him, he said, listen, if you do well, you'll be accepted, which means it implies you knew what well was, right? If you had done well, you'd be accepted. But you didn't do well. And yeah, God's not going to have us guess, right? He's not going to say, hey, if you don't do right, we're going to have a problem, but I'm not going to tell you what right is. Okay, I mean, that's not what that goes against everything that we read both in the Old Testament and the New Testament about God's character. That's not how he does it. And he says here, if you do, he's like, why are you angry? Like, who are you angry with? Like, why are you so upset? Do the right thing, and you'll be accepted. But you didn't do the right thing. So, that's on you, right? So, he could have done well, and he didn't do well, so he wasn't accepted by God. Then if you look here, he goes on, and let's talk about verse 7, where he says, and if you don't do well, sin lies at the door for you, its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. What does that mean, that you should rule over it?
Should be disciplined.
You need to control it. He's like, listen, you're a little out of control. You're letting your emotions get the best of you. And sin's at the door, right? You didn't choose the humble route. And you're putting yourself in a place, I mean, God's given him feedback. To Mark's point, I mean, he's given him feedback here. I want you to think about it. Think if, after today, okay, whenever Brian ends, okay, so after today, what if God gave you feedback, immediate feedback, like literally? And we all knew, because it's not how we do together. He says, Dwayne, and we're all listening. Lisa, okay, just goes down the line. And we all get feedback on how we did today from his perspective. Right? I mean, that'd get my attention. Okay? So you can understand why there's some emotion around this, because that would feel pretty uncomfortable. But it would still be pretty humbling for most of us, right? You would see some who would argue with God. But it's a great tomato. Do you know how hard it is to raise tomatoes in this climate? Okay? And I can't believe you don't love this tomato. And I can't believe you don't love the way that I want to worship you. And I can't believe that, you don't accept the way I want to do it for you. And so it just shows kind of an attitude of, rebellion. So we have a choice to rule over it. He has a choice. Every time, every one of these is a gate to make a choice. And when we're working with each other, every interaction and every situation, we can either keep going down the wrong road, or we can start getting back to the right road. Right? So to Mark's point, he could have then said, I want to sacrifice something to my Lord, and gone out and chased his brother down and say, I beg of you, right? I want to make this right with the Lord. Didn't do that. Okay? And so he didn't rule over it. We know in Matthew 5, right, 21 through 24, we're not going to go there now for time, but it's, we're told, go fix your relationship with your brother. Don't come and offer something to me when you've got a problem with your brother. Here it's, but the idea is go fix it. Now what's interesting, and here's the interesting part. So far, have we talked almost anything about Abel? Is this an issue between Cain and Abel? But what did Abel do? This isn't an issue between Cain and Abel. Abel, he was told, here's what you need to do. Abel went and did it. His brother didn't. Cain and God are having this conversation. Abel's not in this. This is between Cain and God. God tells Cain, be careful. Why are you so angry? Do the right thing, you'll be fine. Be careful. You're treading, sin's at the door. And he doesn't rule it. He doesn't go after it, right, and take care of it. And in verse 8, now when Cain talked with Abel, his brother, it came to pass that when they were in the field, he rose up against his brother Abel and he killed him. What in the world does Abel have to do with any of this?
The person does right, he condemns all those who do wrong. Just not his reaction. I'm going to obey God. People who don't want to obey God are angry at you because they see you.
Sometimes just doing right, you represent, you are a threat, right, by your lifestyle. We don't know that Abel had anything against Cain. We don't know that Abel was just doing what he needed to do.
Well, when
And
What do you think you're talking about that caused the problem? Probably the sacrifices, or maybe God's acceptance of the sacrifice.
you could see where Cain potentially in verse 8 talked with Abel, his brother, and if he hadn't dealt with his anger, which it seems like he probably hasn't, he could have lashed out at Abel. Abel's just wanting to take care of the flock, and he lashes out at Abel. In Galatians 4:16, there's a verse that says, where Paul says, have I become your enemy because what? Because I tell you the truth? Are you going to hate me so if you're going to come to me and ask me about what just happened, and I said, God said that we were supposed to do it like this, and I did it like that. And he doesn't rule his anger, and he doesn't take care of it, he ends up killing his brother. If I become your enemy because I tell you the truth or I stand for what's right? And we need to think about that in the church, right? When we have brothers or sisters who are just doing right, but it makes us uncomfortable because we don't want to do right. Is it really them? Is it really their problem? Or is it our problem? And we're creating a problem because they represent truth, and it makes me fearful that maybe I'm not right or I'm not good enough. And so I react. You have something?
It kind of seems like Cain killing Abel also could have been punitive towards God in a similar way with the whole Joseph thing, because, between the two of them, God favored Abel in that scenario, and Cain's anger was kindled against God. So typically, as humans, when you're angry with somebody, you want to hurt them. It's just a...
Yeah, so the point was it could have been, Cain could have been trying to punish God by killing Abel. Just a little bit, I'm sure, with Joseph and his brothers, it's like, well, we're going to get back at Dad a little bit for being so favoritism towards Joseph, all right? And they watched him for a long time, suffer and suffer and suffer, and they didn't own up to it. Okay, so who knows? The point, there's a lot to unpack here, and you look at James 1:12-15, talks about temptation. We don't have time to get to that. But, man's tempted when it conceives in your heart, right? And then it drives you to action. And so it's really important that all of us, if any time we're in the church and we're feeling resentment, we're feeling anger, we're feeling, we need to pause for a moment and say, am I in the right mind? Am I worshiping God in the right way? Why do I not feel love towards my brother or love towards my sister? What's going on? It's like coming home and you have a bad day at work, although now when you come home from work, a lot of us are already home. But if you actually worked outside the home, which I know some of us still do, you come home and you kick the dog, right? You hear that expression. People come, they get upset, they come home, what did the dog have to do with anything? And so we take things out on other people. And sometimes we're not easy to live with. And sometimes in the church we're not easy to live with. And that's where 1 Corinthians 13 comes in, right? Of being long-suffering, kind, patient, not seeking your own. So, some interesting lessons here from Cain and Abel around unity, that sometimes our relationship with God strains this relationship, and I act weird towards you, and it even has nothing to do with you. It's because I'm afraid I'm not good enough, or I've got a problem with God. I don't feel that I'm walking in unity, right? And so we need to understand people have stuff going on. We need to help each other, bring each other along, but we also need to check our own, all of our own stuff that we're carrying around as well. All right, thanks.